All right, so this is 8.01 for Algebra 2 today, and we are doing some graphing of sine and cosine. So first let's talk about our two general forms for sine and cosine. The first one is a sine bx plus c, and the second is the same exact thing except it's cosine instead of sine. So there's a lot of information that you need to know about each one. So first of all, a sine curve. You need to know what one full cycle of sine looks like. And think about sine starts with the letter S. A sine curve is like a sideways S here. So it starts at the midline, so the middle of the curve, and then it goes up once and then down once. If it was negative, it would flip and it would go down first and then up. And so this is what one cycle looks like. Oh, if it's cosine, think cosine starts with a C, kind of looks like a C that has been rotated. So you can kind of see the C right here. So one cycle is just a U-shaped curve, or if it's negative, it would start down below the middle and then go up like a bell-shaped curve. In order to find the amplitude of either of these, and now amplitude just means how high the graph goes. So you're going to take the number in front, that coefficient of sine or cosine, and take the absolute value of it. And that's going to tell you the height of the curve from the center. So from the center of the curve to this point, it's going to tell you what the distance between them. So if that goes up 2 boxes or if that goes up 3 boxes, that would be your amplitude. The period is how long it takes to complete one cycle. And actually some of your vocab is right over here. So the period is how long it takes to complete one full cycle. And that's really important to remember that definition as well, because it helps us out with a lot of other problems. The frequency we call the letter B. So that comes right after sine or cosine. The interval is going to help us to find our key points, and that's you're going to take your period and divide it into 4 equal parts. So just divide it by 4. And the midline is the middle of the curve, and you're going to find that from however you've shifted this curve up. So you're going to take y equals c. Just like with all of our other functions, you can have vertical and horizontal shifts. The plus, the part that comes after the sine or cosine, whatever you're adding or subtracting, that's going to be your vertical shift. So it's going to go up or down C units. And then if you had a horizontal shift, that would happen right where it's attached to B. So if it's in the parentheses, it would be opposite of what you would think. All right, so again, your vocab over here, the period is how long it takes to complete one cycle. So you have to know that what one cycle looks like, which I just drew up over here. So how long it takes to complete one full cycle of sine. So if this is 2 pi over here, then the period is 2 pi. Here is where one cycle ends of your C. So whatever that is would be your period. The amplitude is how high the graph goes from the center to the top. And we also have a formula for amplitude, which is that you take the maximum value minus the minimum value and divide that by 2. And we won't look at that too much today, but we'll look at it a little bit more in next class. And the frequency is, so that's that B, is the number of cycles that you see from 0 to 2 pi. So it's always to 2 pi. So if you see one cycle from 0 to 2 pi, like up here, then your B would be 1. All right, so here are the steps, and we're going to use these as we go through graphing just y equals sine of x. So the first thing we want to do is identify your amplitude and your period. So I'll keep it up here, and then I'm just going to read it as we go. So I'm going to label my amplitude. So to find the amplitude, you're taking the number, the coefficient in front. So remember, it's a sine bx plus c. So your a is the number in the front here. So this is like saying 1 sine 1x plus 0, if you wanted to really match it up with your a, your b, and your c. So a is just your absolute value of 1, which is 1. Your period, again, really important to remember what that means. The period is the amount of time it takes to complete one full cycle. So to find the period, we're going to do 2 pi divided by b is the formula we gave you at the top. Also note here, this is going to tell us if we should be in radians or degrees. Since there's a pi in it, that tells us we're in radians. I don't see any degree symbols. So 2 pi over b, if it were in degrees, instead of 2 pi, since 2 times 180 is 360, we would do 360 divided by b. And I'll put that up here actually too, or 360 over b. Okay, so now I'm going to take my b value, which again is just the number in front of x, so it's in between the sign and the x. There's no number there, so that's an invisible 1. So 2 pi over 1 gives me a period of 2 pi. All right, next we're going to find the interval. So the interval is going to help us with our table, and that is when we take our period and we divide it by 4. So we just found our period to be 2 pi, so I'm going to take 2 pi divided by 4. I can reduce that to pi over 2. Next, we'll find our midline as well. I don't have this on the steps, but I'm going to include it as well, just so you practice and see what it is. And the midline is whatever your C is, so ours is 0, so it's just going to be y equals 0, also known as the x-axis. Says this a lot on here. Okay, so now we found our interval. We want to fill in our x row of our 5 key points. 1, 2, 3, 4. So here's the x values and here are the y values. We just usually set up our table like this, horizontally instead of vertically. So in your x row, we are always going to start at 0 unless we have a horizontal shift. For this year, we're not going to do too many that have a horizontal shift. We're mainly just going to focus on ones that have vertical shifts. So for this year, we're really going to be mainly just starting at 0. And then you're going to go up by whatever your interval is. So you're going to add pi over 2 to get to the next one. So 0 plus pi over 2 is pi over 2. Then I would add another pi over 2 to that. So pi over 2 plus pi over 2 would give me 2 pi over 2, which is pi. Another way of thinking about it is you could do 0 and then 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, and then 4 pi over 2, which reduces to 2 pi. So I'm just increasing the number next to the pi in the numerator and keeping the 2 the same. And that's counting by pi over 2s. And being able to do that will really help you to make it faster and easier when you're labeling your x-axis as well. But that's really the same thing as just adding pi over 2 every time, just makes it a little easier. So 0, 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, 4 pi over 2. So we filled in our x row. Now decide if we're going to be in degrees or radians. And we already decided earlier on, since it was 0 to 2 pi, that we're going to be in radian mode, which we wrote up here. So now you're going to put your equation into your calculator. I think that got cut off here. And this should be the x row of your 5 key points. And so I'm going to grab my calculator and I'm going to make sure I'm first in radian mode. So it's highlighted, so that's good. Go to y equals, and I'm going to type in sine of x. So we just hit sine and then x. I already have that in. And then I'm going to go use my table to help me here. Now, if you wanted to, you can always look at the graph to help you, of course. So if you want to look at the graph, I would hit zoom trig, which is zoom 7. And you can see this graph, it's always going to graph from negative 360 to 360, or in this case, negative 2 pi to 2 pi. Now, I really want to use my table, so I'm going to go to second window. I'm going to start my table at 0, and then my change in table is going to be whatever my interval is. So my interval here was pi over 2, so I'm going to type in pi divided by 2. And in this screen, it doesn't let you use alpha y equals, so you just have to use the division symbol. Now hit second graph, so go to your table. And it's not going to give it to you as exact values like pi over 2. is going to give you pi over 2 as a decimal, so 1.57. And you can see the y's, though, is what's really going to help you. So really important on here that we set up our table start is 0, and our change in table is going to be whatever your interval is. So in this case, pi divided by 2. So now I'm just copying down what I see in my table. So I've got a 0, and then a 1, a 0, -1, 0. Again, I'm just getting this straight from my y column right here. So 0, 0, pi over 2 is going to be 1, pi is 0, 3 pi over 2 is -1, and 2 pi is 0. As you get better at these, you're going to start to notice that there's a pattern. So one thing that's really important to remember is, whether you're using your calculator or not, is that sine always starts at the midline. So in this case, our midline was 0. So sine is going to start at 0. And then it's a cyclic pattern, so it repeats itself. So it's going to go 0 up, then 0 down to its minimum, then back to 0, the midline. Now that I have my table, I'm going to go ahead and graph these. So the hardest part of graphing it is probably just setting up your axes. So again, you can use the interval to help you set these up. We know we want to get to from 0 to 2 pi, so we need to make sure we include that. I'm going to skip 2 boxes here, and I'm going to call my first one pi over 2. So that's 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, or just pi, 3 pi over 2, and then 4 pi over 2 is 2 pi. And we're just going from 0 to 2 pi, so I don't need to label my negatives over here. And my highest value here is 1, and my lowest is -1. So I want to space out my graph a little bit. So I'm going to call I'm going to skip 3 spaces and call that 1 and call that -1. Just so my graph isn't really close to the x-axis. You want to give yourself some space. And now I'm going to plot my points. So I have 0, 0, pi over 2 is at 1, pi is at 0, 3 pi over 2 is at -1, and 2 pi is back at 0. Now, use your calculator to help you decide what that graph looks like. It should be a nice, smooth curve like that. If you don't make it smooth, that means you need more points. But we want to try to do, we don't want to have to do too much extra work. So it's easiest if you can give me those 5 key points, but then make it really smooth. Make sure that you don't have pointy curves. And then label with the original equation. And my graph goes from 0 to 2 pi, which is set in my interval. And that is how we would graph sine of x. Now, let's go to cosine. So number 2 says to graph y equals cosine of x on the interval from 0 to 360 degrees, excuse me. So as soon as I see this, I know I'm talking about degrees this time. So I'm going to want my calculator in degrees. We're going to do that same process here where we're going to write out all our work. So we're going to find the amplitude first. So remember, your amplitude is the number in the front here. So there's no number, which means it's a 1. The absolute value of 1 is 1. Next, we're going to find your period. Again, really important to remember, the period of a graph is the amount of time, the time it takes, how long it takes to complete one full cycle. So for this, our formula is 2 pi over b. Oh, but this time, actually, we're in degrees. So instead of using 2 pi, 2 times 180 is 360. So I'm going to take 360 and divide it by b. So my b, remember, it's a cosine bx plus c. Your b is after the cosine and before the x. So we have nothing there, so it must be an invisible 1. So that just means our period is 360 degrees. So that means it takes 306 from 0 to 360 on the x-axis to complete one cycle of cosine of x. All right, next after our period, we're going to find the interval. So go back and look at your formula for that. So the interval is when you take your period and divide it by 4. So my period here is 360 that I just found, divided by 4. That gives me 90. So that tells me in my table, I'm going to be going up by 90 degrees each time. And then also include your midline. So the midline is y equals whatever your c value is. So we're not adding anything. So that means we're adding a 0. So your midline is just the x-axis again. And then I want you to show your 5 key points. Now, it doesn't even matter for your 5 key points if you're graphing all of them, but these are the ones you want to show, and then you can adjust it to whatever your interval is up there. All right, so here's our x's and our y's. We said if there's no horizontal shift, which we don't have any, there's no parentheses being added or subtracted next to the cosine, so we're going to start at 0. Then to get to our next number, we're adding 90 to that. So 0 plus 90 is 90. 90 plus 90 is 180. 180 plus 90 is 270. And 270 plus 90 is 360. So now I have my x values filled in. I want to fill in my y values. So this time, I know that it's cosine, so it does not start at the midline. Cosine starts at your a value, so either above or below the midline. To do this one in your calculator, you're again going to start your table at 0. Put it up here. Table start at 0, and your change in table should be your interval, which is 90, but make sure this time we're in degree mode. So pause your video and do that just like we did on the last one. Okay, so again, go to degree mode, then type in your cosine of x, and start your table at 0. This time we're going to increase it by 90 and go to our table. So here we can just fill those values in. So I've got zeros at 1, 90 is 0, -1, 0, 1. Again, this is a positive cosine, so it's going to start above the midline. So it starts at the amplitude, which is A, goes to the midline, then to the minimum, back to the midline, into its maximum. Remember, a C opens up like a U-shaped curve if it is positive, and would be a bell, like a mountain, a bell-shaped curve if it is negative. All right, so now we'll set up our x-axis. So again, I'm going to skip 2 boxes and label my 90, 180, 270, and 360. Again, my amplitude is 1, so I'm going to skip 3 boxes for my 1 and -1. And plot my points. So 0, 1, 90, 0, 180, -1, 270 back at the midline, and 360 back at my maximum. Make it a nice smooth curve. And again, you can graph it on your calculator. If you do so, again, hit zoom trig, because that resets your window in degree mode. So it goes up by 90s instead of 2 pi's. So really important to always hit zoom trig to see it. And we're just graphing from 0 to 360, so that's why we only see the right side after the y-axis. Make sure it's nice and smooth, and label with the original equation. So if you wanted to graph more than that, which we will on the next one, you would just repeat the pattern. So see how it goes: maximum, midline, minimum, midline, maximum, then next it would go to the midline. Then 2 away from that, it would go to the minimum. If I wanted to extend over here, it would go back to your midline, and then to your minimum, then to your midline, and then to your maximum. So it just bounces between each time. It always checks in with the midline after it goes to the max or the min. All right, let's try another one. Number 3, graph f of x equals 4 sine pi x on the interval from -2 to 2. So now we're back to radian mode. No degrees. I think the rest of these are going to be in radian mode for you as a little hint. All right, so first, find your amplitude, find your period, your interval, and your midline. So find those and then check back in with the video. All right, your amplitude here should have been the absolute value of 4, so that's going to be 4. Your period is 2 pi over b. This time our value for b is the number between sine and x, so that's your pi, coefficient of x. So I'm going to do 2 pi over pi. The pi's cancel. My period is 2. My interval is my period divided by 4. So my period was 2. So 2 divided by 4 gives me 1/2. And my midline is y equals c. Again, we're not adding anything, so it's just the x-axis, or y equals 0. Next, let's do our 5 key points. So now that you know you've got your interval right, 1, 2, 3, 4, make sure you go up by your interval, fill in your top x row right now, and then try to use your calculator to help you fill in the y row as well. All right, so again, we start at 0. We're going up by 1/2 because that's our interval. So that's 1 over 2, 2 over 2, which is just 1, 3 over 2, and then 4 over 2, which is 2. So again, you can do that fraction thing where you just increase the numerator by 1, 1 over 2, 2 over 2, 3 over 2, 4 over 2, or add 1/2 each time to get to the next number. In your calculator, make sure you're in radian mode. So I'm in degree mode now, so I need to switch it back. Go back to your y equals. You're typing in 4 sine, and your pi is over here on the caret key, x. Oops, I did alpha by accident. Second pi x. Both of those should go in the parentheses, and that's really important. And again, just look at your graph. You're going to hit zoom trig. That'll reset it now that we're in radian mode. So you can see we're seeing more of these curves because our frequency, our b value is high right there. So now I'm going to go over here and, oh, I didn't change this. So go to table start 0. And this time we want to increase by our interval, which is 1/2. 1 divided by 2 or 0.5. Then go to your table. Now that looks better. And you can see we're increasing by 1/2. 0, 1/2, 1, 3 over 2, 2 over 2. And then we'll just copy these into our table. So 0, 4, 0, -4, 0. Again, as you want to start to be doing these without your calculator, think about here, since this was sine starts at the midline. And our midline was at 0. There was no change in our vertical shift. So sine starts at the midline. Since it was positive sine, it starts by going up first to its maximum. Back to the midline, back to the minimum, then back to the midline. If this had been negative sine, it would have been 0, -4, 0, +4, 0. All right, so sine starts at the midline. And now we'll go up and fill in our, label our x-axis. So we're going up by 1/2. So I'm going to skip 2 boxes again. So this will be 1/2, 1, 3 over 2. So 1 over 2, 2 over 2, 3 over 2, 4 over 2. Now in here it said to graph from -2 to 2. So I need to extend this to -1/2. -1, -3 over 2, and -2. Our amplitude is 4, and you can see in our table we go up to 4 down to -4. So I'm okay with counting 1 box here, so that'll be 4, 1, 2, 3, and that would be -4. I'll switch colors for my graph and plot my points. So I've got 0, 0. At 1/2 I'm at 4, at 1 I'm at 0, at 3/2 I'm at -4, and back to my midline here. Now this one again said to graph from -2 to 2. So to get to -2, you're just going to repeat the pattern. You don't need to show me more of a table. You just have to repeat it. So now, last I was at the maximum, then the midline. So now if I go 2 boxes over to the left, I'm going to be at my minimum. 2 more boxes, I'm going to be back at the midline. 2 more boxes, I'm going to be back at the maximum now, and then back to the midline. And then I, again, connect with a smooth curve. A little lopsided there. Okay, so that we can label as y equals 4 sine pi of x. So again, make sure you go back and extend it to where they want, but you only need to show those 5 key points, and it repeats. It's a cyclic pattern. So it goes midline, max, midline, min, midline. Here, midline, so since we're at maximum, max, midline, min, midline, max, midline. Repeats over and over again. All right, let's do another one. Number 4, we've got f of x equals negative 3 minus 1/2 cosine of x over 2. So first thing I would do here is rewrite this so it's in my a cosine bx plus c form. So I'm going to keep my negative 1/2 cosine x over 2 first plus my positive 3. So now I can find my amplitude, period, all that stuff easily. Pause the video, find your amplitude, period, interval, midline, and your 5 key points. And your 5 key points. Okay. So here, your amplitude is the absolute value of your A, so that should have been absolute value of negative 1/2, which is just 1/2. Your period is 2 pi over b. Notice again, you're in radian mode here. And our b value is, this one is a little tricky for some students. So it's the coefficient of x. So when you write x over 2, that's the same thing as this is a 1 in front of your x. So that's the same thing as writing 1/2 times x right there. So your number in front of x is just 1/2. So this would be 2 pi divided by 1/2. So in your calculator, just type in 2 divided by 1/2. Or if you want to do it out, you would do keep, change your division to multiplication, and then flip the 1/2 to 2. So if you do 2 divided by 1/2 in your calculator, it gives you 4, but don't forget to bring along the pi. So our period is 4 pi, so our interval is our period divided by 4. So that's going to be 4 pi over 4, which is pi. And our midline is y equals our c, and our c right here would be 3. That's what's being added. All right, and then our 5 key points. Now these ones can be a little tricky. Sometimes it's helpful to graph this first if you're not using, if you're trying to figure out the bottom, the y values on your own. I usually graph it first, actually before I fill them in whenever I have a shift, because it's just easier. But if you're using your calculator, you can fill in the whole table. So 0, where our interval is pi, so that's going to be our change in table. And we're going up by pi. So whatever you do have to fill in the x row first. So 0, we're adding pi to that because that's our interval. So 1 pi plus pi is 2 pi, plus another pi is 3 pi, plus another pi is 4 pi. In your calculator, you would put all that in, make sure you're in radian mode, and fill those in. I'll show you that because I know some of you are unsure about the calculator. So you could type in the original. So 3 minus 1 over 2 cosine. And here you can do x over 2, or you could do 1/2 x, a lot of different options there. And I'm already in radian mode. I want my table to start at 0, and this time I want my interval to be pi. And here I see I've got 2.5, 3, 3.5, 3, my midline, and then 2.5. So I'll show you how to do that graphically as well if you weren't using your calculator. But before we can do anything, you always got to set up label your axes. So I'm going up by pi. So 1 pi, 2 pi, and I want to graph it to 4 pi, so we're good stopping at 4 pi. I want to go to negative 4 pi, so I need to include my negative x-axis as well. 3 pi, negative 4 pi. So I skipped 2 boxes each time. And then I want to get up to 4. I'm actually going to skip 2 boxes here because I know that my amplitude is a half. So I'm going to be, and I'm at 2.5 and 3.5, so it'll make it a little more spaced out if I give 2 boxes there. All right, so what I would do first, no matter what, is sketch out my midline. So my midline is going to be y equals 3. So I know that's the center of my curve. Now, since this is, so you could just go ahead and plot your points, but I'm showing you how to think through it if you were doing it without a calculator. So first, I know that this is cosine. I know cosine does not start at the midline. It starts above or below the midline. Since this is negative cosine, it's negative 1/2 cosine. Right here, since it's negative, it's going to start below the midline. Okay, so I know it's going to start at the A value below the midline. So A is 1/2. So on my y-axis, I'm going to start 1/2 below the midline. Then I go to pi, so 2 boxes from there. And I'm going to go to my midline. Then at 2 pi, I'm going to go to my maximum. So, too high. My amplitude is 1/2, so I would go half a box, or in this case, a full box, because that's 3.5 and then 4 above. Then at 3 pi, I'm back at the midline, and then at 4 pi, I'm going to be at my minimum, which in this case is 2.5. So that is one cycle of my curve f of x equals, and I label with the original equation, cosine x over 2. But this asks me to graph from negative 4 pi to 4 pi. So pause your video now and bring it all the way back to negative 4 pi and just repeat the pattern. All right, so last I was at midline, then minimum. So now I'm going to skip 2 boxes, go back to my midline, skip 2, go to my maximum, skip 2, back to my midline, skip 2, and back to my minimum. And then connect that with a smooth curve. So you should see nice smooth curve, and you should be seeing 2 cycles. So this is one cycle, and then this is the second cycle. So here you can see that the cosine curve is like this. That's when you have a negative cosine, versus if you had a positive cosine, one cycle looks like this. Remember, C for cosine. Okay. And the last one, we have 2 of them here. So what I'd like you guys to do is pause the video and fill in all of the information for the step. If you can, try to graph it, and then we'll talk about the last one together. All right, so here your amplitude should have been 3, period, which is 2 pi over b. Should have been 2 pi over 2, which is just pi. And your interval is your period over 4, so that would be pi over 4. Your midline here, which I didn't include, is y equals 0, because there's no c value. And your 5 key points. If you haven't filled these in because it wasn't there, go ahead and do that now. Pause the video and do it. All right, so this should have been 0, 1 pi over 4, then 2 pi over 4. I'm just increasing the numerator, 3 pi over 4, and 4 pi over 4, which is just pi. And this one could reduce to pi over 2 as well. All right, and then put that in your calculator, your 3 cosine 2x. We're graphing it from 0 to 2 pi, so you should have your calculator in radian mode. Go ahead and put that in, and fill in your bottom row if you haven't already. So this should be 3, 0, negative 3, 0, 3. Your change in table at this one should have been pi over 4, and start your table at 0. Remember, this is cosine, so it's going to start above the midline. Since it was positive cosine, if it had been negative cosine, it'd start below the midline. And over here, our amplitude here should be absolute value of negative 1, which is 1. Your period is 2 pi over b, which is 2 pi over 1, so just 2 pi. Your interval is your period divided by 4, so that would be 2 pi over 4, which reduces to pi over 2. Again, your midline, we're not adding any c on, so it would just be y equals 0. And your 5 key points, 1, 2, 3, 4, starting at 0, going up by pi over 2, since that's my interval. So 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, and 4 pi over 2, which is 2 pi. Put that in your calculator if you haven't already. We know this is sine, and sine starts at the midline, and our midline is 0, so we should be starting at 0. It's negative sine, so it's going to start by going down first. So instead of going up to 1, we're going to go down to -1, then 0, then 1, then back to 0. And then I asked you guys to graph these on the graph together. So the hardest part on this one is doing out your scale. So you want to use the smaller amount, will make it easier. So in this case, pi over 4 is smaller than pi over 2. So I'm going to count by pi over 4s here. So 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2, 3 pi over 4. So this method is really helpful when you're labeling your axis. 4 pi over 4, because then after 4 pi over 4 comes 5 pi over 4. We want to go all the way to 2 pi. Then 6 pi over 4, which reduces to 3 pi over 2. Or if you wrote 6 pi over 4, that's fine too. 7 pi over 4, and 8 pi over 4, which is 2 pi. All right, and we want to go from 0 to 2 pi. Here, our highest value we're going to get to is a 3, so I'm going to make this 3, and this -3, just counting by ones on the y-axis. Go ahead and pull out your points for both of them. It might help to do them 2 different colors. All right, so the first one is at 0, 3, and then pi over 4 is 0, pi over 2 is at -3, back to 0. We're skipping 1 box every time. I want to go all the way to 2 pi. So after I graph my 5 key points for y equals 3 cosine 2x, I need to repeat the pattern all the way to 2 pi. So back here, down, back, and up. Okay, now I'm going to switch colors. I'll make my other one red. So that one, we're going to start at 0, 0, because it's sine. At pi over 2, so I'm skipping 2 boxes, I go down to -1. Then at pi, back to my midline. 3 pi over 2, up to 1, and 2 pi to 0. So it doesn't go up as high for that midline, and we only see 1 cycle of sine, where in the blue curve, we saw 2 cycles of cosine. And then the last question asks you to find where they are equal to each other. So here's where you're going to type in your calculator. So in for your y1, type in 3 cosine of 2x. In for your y2, you're going to type in negative sine of x. We want it from 0 to 2 pi. So make sure that your calculator is in radian mode. Very important. And we're going to find where these two are equal to each other. So this is what we just graphed up here. So we're looking for where these intersect. So I see the red and blue hit here, 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 and here. So we should have 4 intersection values. So 4 x values that where these two graphs are equal to each other. So pause your video here and type those in for your y1 and your y2. And then I'm going to have you hit zoom trig again after you graph them for us to find our intersection points. All right, so here we have 3 cosine, in parentheses, the 2 and the x, and then in for y2, negative sine of x. Again, hit zoom, let me make sure I'm in radian mode, and then hit zoom 7, which is your zoom trig. Now, because I want this to go from 0, I only care about the intersections from 0 to 2 pi. I'm going to go to my window and set my x min to 0 and my x max to 2 pi, because that's all I want to see. And then you can leave the rest. So x min at 0, x max at 2 pi. And again, that's because of this right here that's coming from. All right, so now you're going to hit second trace intersect, which is number 5. First curve, it's telling me I'm on y1, so I'm going to hit enter. Second curve, I'm on y2, so I'm going to hit enter. And then guess, and I like to start all the way to the left, so I go in order, and I move my cursor all the way here. Don't forget to hit enter. You can't have it say guess here. It needs to say the actual intersection point. And then you're going to write out that x value right onto your paper. So pause your video and do the other 3 intersection points and write those down. All right, so you should have gotten your 4 answers. I'll give you another one just to make sure you were on the right track. So 2.2220349, and then you should have gotten, oops, it's not letting me right there, 2 more answers there, and I want you guys to fill in what those are. Again, you should be doing second, trace, intersect for these ones. So this would be second trace intersect, which is number 5 to get those, and you have to hit enter 3 times. So make sure it doesn't say guess, hit first curve enter, second curve enter, and then hit guess. Make sure when you hit guess though, you move your cursor over to where you see the 2 graphs intersecting. So you have to move that cursor for each of the 4 points. Okay, and those are going to be your 4 answers. Again, you should have the other 2 written out on your paper. And that is it for today. So I know that's a lot of graphing with sine and cosine. Let me know if you have any questions, and pie out.